Everything is God. Everything is God. And God, you are. Just take a moment, if you would, and look around and see the God in everyone. God present right here, right now. Yeah, I hear the giggling going on. I hear that giggling. We saw God. Kind of tickles you, honey. Kind of tickles you. So when we look at the earth, what do we see? God? Yeah, that song certainly points that out, doesn't it? Yeah. So Earth Day, I've not always paid attention to Earth Day. But I know that there are things that I should be doing. And I do some of them. Do you? Yeah. I go to the grocery store and they ask me the ultimate question. Paper or plastic? And I very arrogantly say, I have my own bag. And so I kind of have an attitude about it. It may just be me, but I just think that I'm doing everything right by bringing my own bag. And then the time went shopping a couple of days ago with somebody else who was driving, and my bag was elsewhere. So what do you do then? It was like a shame spiral. And so this thing, it kind of starts getting deeper, and I start thinking about plastic. Okay, paper or plastic? Okay, do I kill a fish or a tree? And then at first it can be a real dilemma. How many of you have felt a little bit overwhelmed with not just the superficial question of paper or plastic? Oh, it's only me, huh? I ordered some things for the service today. You'll see some of them out in the reception, which, by the way, is going to be the beach that we've created right here along the side. Well, there are some things that I would not call recyclable. And but in the box that it came in, there was a recyclable, earth-aware packaging. It's kind of like, what? Okay, so everything we do affects the earth. Now, I'm sure this was way before most of our time, but actually first Earth Day was in 1970. So this is actually the 45th Earth Day. And it always happens on April 22nd. And it just happens to be a Wednesday this year. How it happened was there was a senator called Gaylord Nelson, and he was flying over the California coast and saw the oil spill. And that touched his heart because he was from Wisconsin, and he had grown up in the woods and had a deep appreciation of nature. And this was difficult for him to see. So he had this grand idea at that time. There were teach-ins happening in the colleges and things. And so he came up with this idea of a grassroots effort to bring the environment into awareness. Because today, paper or plastic could be a real dilemma, or we could already have our bags. But before then, I know this is way before our time, but I heard that it wasn't even in the conversation. It wasn't even in the conversation, and now we have it in our conversation and in our awareness. What really amazed me about this movement is that he says it organized itself. There was no, okay, government involved. Okay, I'm going to say it. All y'all, get get yourself, here's the law. You're going to do this. This was a grassroots effort. And he allowed each organization, each community expressed and manifested and put together their own expression of what environmentally consciousness would look like. And it was the largest demonstration in the history of the U.S. And it made the environmental movement a major force in our lives. So that's a little background of that. So he says, this is one of the things he said about the environment. Our goal is not just a clean environment, not just an environment of clean air and water and scenic beauty. The objective is an environment of decency, quality, and mutual respect for all other human beings and all other living creatures. Now, when I'm checking out and I go, I'm not really in that relationship, am I? So this kind of gives me a little clue that I might be off a bit. But the other piece of this happening on the beach is significant to me, not just because of my name, okay? But that there's another story. If we go back, a couple of millennia, couple of thousand years, there was a story that happened on a beach somewhere around the 1st century. And it's told in John 21. It's the only place that this story is told. Some of you know where I'm going with this. So it's a different time, a different place. But the story might have something for us. It's the story of when the disciples, Jesus had, the story goes that he had been crucified and he had come back a couple of times. And this time, he came back for the 3rd time. But the disciples were out in the sea fishing, and they had been fishing all night long and had not caught anything. Think about that metaphorically. Fishing all night long with nothing caught. And so at the end, they hear somebody from the shore saying, "Hey dudes, put your nets on the other side." Oh, okay. Well, we'll try that. They did, and they started catching fish. 153 is the count, just in case you wanted to know that. And then the most beloved, it's called the disciple that Jesus loved, said to Peter, "That's Jesus." So Peter gets out, starts running toward the shore. Is this story familiar to some of you? Yeah. So Peter's running up there, and Jesus said, "Okay, you guys, bring me some fish, and I'll cook you breakfast." See where we're going with this? We're cooking breakfast. Jesus is cooking breakfast for them on the beach. Fish. He brought in bread. And the disciples were nourished after a long night of fishing. Then Peter is walking with Jesus, and he thinks he's got Jesus all to himself. And he turns around, and that same disciple is following him. That beloved disciple. And Peter says, "What about him? And Jesus said, "What is that to you? Follow me." First time I read that, I thought, I wonder if Jesus is telling him to mind his own business. That's how I would have taken it. Like, oh, I must have done something. I'm asking about the guy behind me, and Jesus is kind of putting me in my place. But would Jesus really do that? Well, I'm going to leave that up to you, but I want to just flesh it out a little bit more. The other piece is Jesus says, "Follow me." And I'm wondering, what does that mean? Follow Jesus. So like any good 21st century theologian, I Googled it. And I came up with all kinds of things, besides Twitter, which, by the way, there is a Jesus you can follow on Twitter. It's amazing what we have open to us these days. So following could be seeking, serving, forsaking everything else, becoming a sheep. These were all these options. And then I started thinking, well, maybe this isn't in the literal sense, because actually I can't follow that man Jesus from the 21st or from the first century. So what is that for me? What does this mean for me? And I'm putting it out here for you. What does this mean to you, especially in light of Earth Day? Gaylord Nelson had another quote that I want to bring in at this moment. Yeah. Some people who talk about the environment talk about it as though it involved only a question of clean air and clean water. The environment involves the whole broad spectrum of man's relationship to all other living creatures, including other human beings. Relationship. So I saw how Jesus had a special relationship with each one of those disciples. The one with Peter, the one following him. But Peter was kind of annoyed. Peter wanted Jesus all to himself. Peter had been upstaged a few times by this same disciple. At the Lord's Supper, this is the disciple that got to sit next to Jesus. Remember that story? This is the disciple who asked, "Who will betray you?" This disciple always had it right. Always did it right. You know those people in your life? It's just annoying. They're the ones who say, "I have my own bag." So, relationship. Jesus is relating to each one of them in a special way. So when he talks to Peter, that's about Peter. Peter, why are you making that your business? What are you up to? What are you up to? He doesn't tell us, this is yours to do. He asks. He asks the question, and we're empowered out of that question, aren't we? So back to this telling people what they should do, which none of us ever do. Charles Fillmore had this to say about it in Christian Healing. He's the co-founder of Unity. Said, "People do not realize how they are bound by their selfishness." This is like Peter. What about me? What about me? It's all about me. What's he doing here? And it is not wise to tell them openly. Until they understand the difference between their real being and the mortal personality. So I'll give that to you again. People do not realize how they are bound by their selfishness, and it is not wise to tell them openly until they understand the difference between their real being and the mortal personality. So who was Peter being when he said, what about him? Who am I being when I say, I have my own bags? Who are we being when we are not fully conscious of what we're doing with our environment? When we're not fully conscious of our relating? When we start operating out of a relationship that is not consistent with our divine Christ nature? Eric Butterworth had this to say about, it's not about the environment. I mean, it could be about the environment, but what he says is, we may have some grievous problems here. But what he says is, they can be solved. The solution must be a spiritual one. Spiritual things can only be spiritual discerned. So Jesus was the one who made the great breakthrough in the world within. So if we look to our way shower, Jesus, and we check and see what was happening in this interaction with Peter. Yeah, so we get a little bit bigger picture here of the world. So there are 3 R's that are happening here in the conversation with Jesus. The first one is recognize. Recognize that we have that small self. That small self is not something to be. There's a word in the Bible, rebuke. We're not talking about rebuking. We're talking about recognizing. That can be a clue for us of where we are looking, where we are coming from. So recognize, when I start being concerned about what they're doing, that could be my small self. That could be my pathway back into my Christ consciousness. Relate. Oh yes, the other part about recognize. Sorry. Recognizing our intentions. What are our intentions? What are our intentions when we start telling someone, you ought to do this? Or I ought to do this? What are our intentions? Okay, the next one, relate. Yes. So Jesus relating to each of the disciples out of their own unique gifts. He treats each of us. I'm going to get a little broader here. Not he, the person. But we each have our expression. We are each an expression of that divine nature. The third R is respond. So we're able to respond out of that Christ nature, out of our wholeness. And our activities and our attitudes are consistent with that in our Christ nature. The next one is rock on. Jesus was not rocked by the question, who is that back there, was he? He was, what is that to you? Follow me. The fifth R is rise up. Rise up out of those, perhaps we would call them material things. Rise up to our mission. What is your mission? Who have you come here to be on this planet? Never mind. that little person, or the person who recognizes, oh, that's a little person. The truth of who I am is this. So, these 5 R's, and with the sustenance, the breakfast, the nourishment that we get from having breakfast with the Christ is empowering. So whether it's empowered to be on the beach cleaning it up, or having breakfast, or serving breakfast, I ask you, what is that for you? What is that for you? One of our tools in Unity, when we come up to these questions, is prayer and meditation. So I'm going to invite you to go into meditation with these questions. What is that to you? What is the environment to you? What is earth to you? And you might have another question on your heart at this moment. So we're going to look at that. So I just want you to allow yourself to be supported in the chair that you're sitting in. And start noticing that you're breathing. You might just let that breath out. One big exhale. I invite you to imagine yourself on a beach. And as you hear these sounds of the waves coming in and out, you might even notice your breath in sync with that. And you may be standing there in the sand. So notice your feet. Notice your feet, feeling the sand underneath them. And now notice that between your toes, you feel the warmth of that sand. And you feel totally supported by this earth. Notice the space between your toes filling with sand. And you feel the warmth of the sun. Breathing in and breathing out. And now in the distance, you notice something in the distance. So you begin to walk towards that, slowly feeling each foot in the sand, breathing and letting go as you walk toward what you see. And your vision is getting clearer and clearer. And then you see there's a fire on the beach and breakfast has been made for you. And you allow yourself to sit down and partake of this nourishment that has been provided to you. And you begin to feel a warm feeling in your heart center that you are loved. Someone has loved you enough to provide this for you. And now you see someone coming toward you. And they see you. And they see you fully. They see you for your whole self. And you are loved. You allow yourself to be loved. And then you see Christ's nature. And beckoning you to follow your whole Christ nature. And as you begin to see this and feel this, just sit in the silence of the feeling of being loved, loving, and being nourished as you sit in the silence. Now, as you slowly, gently, very gently begin to come back to this time, this space, this place, with all the gifts and all the talents, all the love that you've ever needed, all that you've ever longed for, you'll come back with.